In our focus here today on eNCA, nearly a week since the devastating wildfires tore through parts of Table Mountain, destroying UCT's library, among other important buildings. The library was 200 years old. That's not the only piece of history lost. The Rhodes Memorial and Mostert Mill also went up in flames. Thousands of people were forced to evacuate their homes and student residences. But what is next for those affected? Our reporters, Lindsay Dentlinger, as I mentioned, Ronald, Masinda and Monique Mortlock, following the story. They join me from Cape Town. So, Ronald, let's start with you. So, volunteers played their part in containing the Cape Town fires. You've been speaking to them today. What have they said to you?
Yes, Sally, well, looking back over the past 5 days when that raging fire burnt hectares and hectares of land and buildings in Cape Town, and then on Monday that strong southeasterly wind that was going at around 30 kilometers an hour made things so difficult for many firefighters. And throughout the course of the day, we've been speaking about the heroic efforts of the people who work in this very building, the City of Cape Town fire and service workers who have been working tirelessly. But also it has to be mentioned that a lot of volunteers, people who don't earn a living doing what they do, helping people, helping to save lives, those were some of the people that we also met throughout the course of the week in Newlands, many of them sacrificing their own lives just to save others. And we spoke to several of them. One of them is from Volunteer Wildlife Services, John Menking, and this is what he had to say earlier.
Since the first caller came out from our nature partner, Table Mountain National Park, we had a number of crews on the fire line at the actual start, the origin of the fire, out at the game camp. And the wind was quite strong, flame length was quite long, very hot, difficult conditions from the get-go. Aerial support was great, focusing at that time on Rhodes Memorial, but we had a number of crews. It got to a point where the conditions got a bit too hectic, so we had to pull back. We were later then redeployed to other areas of interest. But in the last few days, having about 150 members on rotation, 25 crews including all our support staff, under different conditions from fighting the flames to the mopping up. It's been quite hectic, but we've all been safe, and I feel we've done a great job with our partners.
Ronald, is there any chance at all that this fire could flare up again? We know that it was officially contained a few days ago, but we also know that certainly underneath some of the areas that are burnt, they're still smouldering, there's still possibilities. What are they saying about any ongoing risk?
So firefighters will certainly not rest on their laurels this weekend. We heard last night, Sally, that the people at this very station had to put out fires near Rhodes Memorial, where there were quite a number of hot spots where there were quite a lot of smoke, even when we arrived there earlier this morning. So there seems to be that where the fire is not completely gone just yet, and people are not leaving anything to chance. We've heard from several firefighters say that, you know, during the aftermath of a fire, no one can actually take a chance, and that they have to be stationed on the mountain 24 hours every day from Sunday till now. And this has been something that we've seen. Quite a number of trucks have been there, but what could be fortunate could be that if there are no strong winds and if there are raging fires, that at least there are choppers to put out the fires. Because one of the difficulties this week, especially on Monday where there were strong winds, was that the choppers were unable to fly to disperse those water bombs. So those were one of the challenges that led to large parts of Table Mountain completely gutted. So the firefighters will certainly be working around the clock. Still, they will probably not rest this weekend until they make sure that that fire is completely stopped.
A clip on that as well. Let's take a listen.
You can actually say that the fire is out. That is just the hot spots that comes up here and there. They're working at upper campus at UCT, and that's I think that during the course of the day, but obviously during the weekend they'll monitor the situation. I think we are extremely lucky and fortunate that the southeaster died down on Tuesday, and we had favourable firefighting conditions for the remainder of the week.
Yeah, and you know, Ronald, as I was listening to that clip and what you said, I was looking at Monique's shot, and Monique, we're coming to you now, but behind you we can still see wisps of smoke. Just tell us where you are. I know that you've been speaking to students at the various drop-off points. Just give us the picture from your perspective and tell us if that wisp of smoke behind you is safely contained.
Sally, I'm standing along the M3 as you head to Philip Khosana Drive, and this was the site I'm going to move over these burnt stumps here. I'm going to ask my colleague Mario Pedro to show you. We didn't choose this spot on purpose. This just happened to be as we were busy setting up. You can see the smoky bit of wood in the distance, and this is what we've been seeing at the different spots we've been at. Even earlier this week when I was at Deer Park, when the fire was contained there were bits of smouldering wood, and you could see the smoke still rising from the trees and from the ground. Earlier when we were at Rhodes Memorial Tea Room, which was completely gutted by the fire, a fire truck arrived on the scene because there were some bits of smoke emanating from the ground, and this is what Sandparks has been telling us, that even though the fire is contained, it's still we're still not 100% in the clear, because what happens with a vegetation fire like this, and what we've been seeing even at UCT campus when we visited there yesterday, is the smouldering bits. As you move the debris, as you clear areas, as pieces get moved, it can easily spark up again when it gets oxidized and when wind hits it. So this goes along with what Ronald mentioned a little earlier, that it's not only firefighters that will continue monitoring the area, but also Sandparks and also the SPCA.
Points that you visited today as well, Monique. Monique, can you hear me? We'll come back to Monique in a moment.
Sorry, Sally, I missed that.
Yes, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you've been visiting drop-off points as well today. Just update us on that.
Yes, Sally, we first started off at the UCT's Graduate School of Business, which has been one of the main sites for drop-offs of donations, and we saw the students there and the student volunteers packing up those donations of clothes, of stationery, of food, because what's happening now is they will be distributing it to those affected students from Fuller House and Smuts Hall, those students who may have lost all of their belongings. We also visited the Gift of the Givers makeshift command center at the old mutual offices in Pinelands, where we spoke to Gift of the Givers project manager Ali Sibley. He mentioned that they've been receiving so many items. In fact, they have too much, that although they have enough to give to affected UCT students, CPUT students, what they'll now be doing with the surplus is giving to the needy. Let's take a listen to Sibley.
As we know, there are many rural schools. We already received today calls. As we know, school holiday started today. We had many calls from principals in the rural areas. They are worried. They are going on holiday. You know, the only meal the children are getting from the school. They are worried what the children are going to eat for the next week. We told them from next week onwards, we will be distributing the surplus goods to some of those schools where teachers will be working during the school holidays just to come in for those few hours, providing a meal to their children. So we have many areas and many projects where the surplus goods will be donated, and for that, even though we tried stopping the donations, people still said that, you know, there's a greater need out there as well. So we'd like to support those initiatives as well.
Well, Monique, I'm going to come back to you in a moment. I want to talk to you about the animals. But Lindsay, I'd like to bring you in here. You, of course, at UCT, and it's been a really tough and terrible week for the university, that massive loss of literary heritage, but also the students. It must have been a really panicky and difficult time. You have spoken to Mamokgethi Phakeng, the Vice-Chancellor. Tell us a little bit more about what she's saying at the moment.
Well, Sally, it's not only just about what has been lost, it's also about what they are managing to save here. They've boarded up the site for the day, fenced in the area. It's the library you see there behind me and the cranes. Today we saw workers being hoisted onto the roof, trying to raise the roof trusses. And then we also saw quite a mammoth exercise today, trying to remove all the items that have not been so severely damaged and that which could be saved. We must know that there's also several items that weren't necessarily damaged by fire, but damaged by the water that still continued to trickle down into the basement. But what the Vice-Chancellor did tell me earlier today is that the koi and sand collections are totally, from what we understand, intact and have not been destroyed, and she's very pleased and thankful that those collections have not been destroyed. I also spoke to the Executive Director of Libraries here at UCT today, and she was saying that we need to have a greater conversation, a national conversation about how we protect our heritage. I understand that the university was mulling getting a conservator for the pieces that are housed in this building, and certainly many of them have volunteered to help separate, to sort, to determine what can be salvaged and just in what state everything is in. But the Vice-Chancellor telling me today that this has been a real learning lesson, not only for this university but all universities, to take care and to put systems in place to prevent damage from disasters like fires. But the Vice-Chancellor saying more important than all of this, Sally, is protecting people's lives. Nobody was injured or lost their life as a result of the fire. And let's take a listen to that interview a little bit earlier today.
We should prioritize lives and prioritize making sure that the students are safe, because at the end of it, they've got to come back to the academic program whilst we fix the buildings, which can take time, but it will not be quick to fix people. That's why we prioritize the health and safety of people during this process.
How are the students doing, Lindsay? We know they started moving back into their reses, but obviously campus looks very different to how it did a week ago.
Yes, Sally, the campus is very, very quiet. As we know, UCT has put a pause on the academic program for the time being. The Vice-Chancellor telling me it will resume again on Monday. Of course, Tuesday will again be a holiday, and then there are not too many days before they have their recess. So for now, very, very quiet. Students certainly not allowed here on Upper Campus, where I've been for most of the day. Just behind me is the Fuller Hall, and just across from me, Smuts Hall, 2 residences which were also impacted by the fire, the extent of which not completely known, but certainly from the outside visibly it doesn't appear to be anywhere as close as the damage you see to the Jagger Library behind me. But those students have not been able to return to their residences. I was on the lower campuses earlier today, where students have already mostly by and large made their way back into their residences, very grateful that everything is pretty much how they left it. As some of them told me that they enjoyed having a stay in a hotel for a few days, and so that distracted them a little bit from doing their work. But as I say, they weren't expected to submit any assignments, to do any major work this week while their academic program has been put on hold. And so we understand that tonight it's still the students who were housed in these 2 affected residences here on the Upper Campus that are still spending some time in hotels and will be placed soon. But I spoke to some first years earlier today who have since returned to their residences.
I was so happy to find everything intact. Like, there was no sign of fire or smoke. Everything was just fine. The UCT people really did a good job with cleaning up everything.
Well, it was a very, very shocking experience for me, and yeah, the smoke was really bad. Like, the whole mountain, I couldn't see it, and it was reaching everywhere. It was very, very hard to breathe for some people.
Yeah, and we are just very fortunate that we lost no one in this fire. It was a touch and go at times, certainly, Lindsay, and really good news that you're bringing us that the koi and sand collections have in fact been saved. So that's some glimmer of hope. Quickly back to you, Monique. We know, of course, that a lot of animals have suffered through this fire. Lots of efforts by SANParks and SPCA. What can you tell us?
Yes, Sally, when I spoke to the Cape of Good Hope SPCA a little earlier, they were telling me that they won't stop scouring the areas, scouring the burnt areas to find, to see if they can find any animals in need of help, any injured animals. And they've also called on the public to contact them or sandparks if they do come across an animal that's wounded or injured, not to try and rescue that animal themselves, but instead call those authorities straight away. What the SPCA also said is that they've found, so far they haven't found any animals who are alive, but they've discovered many animal carcasses, burnt out animal carcasses. But they say it's not too many, and they believe that most of the animals living on or around the Table Mountain National Park managed to get away. SANParks' Gavin Bell explained a little earlier that what many of the animals do, those animals who can't run away fast enough, they burrow tunnels. And when Mario and I actually arrived here, we saw a field mouse running into a little tunnel right behind us. So we can clearly see animals just using the ingenuity, trying to escape where they can. But unfortunately, many of the animals the SPCA have found have been deceased.